Welcome to State of Tech, Synechron's innovation podcast. Synechron is a leading global digital transformation consulting firm focused on financial services and big technology organizations. Our State of Tech podcast hosts subject matter experts and business leaders as they explore emerging technologies, industry insights, innovation trends, and more. Let's dive into today's episode.
Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Synechron's State of Tech podcast series, where we explore the key topics of the day. I'll be your host, Kotecha, and in today's episode, we'll be discussing what's often referred to as the new gold of the digital era, data. Tim Jennings, Senior Director of Data Analytics at Synechron, will give us his insights on the ever-growing importance of data and its potential to revolutionize businesses. We'll also discuss the challenges that come along with managing and maximizing the usability of data. Are we ready to go?
Yes, thank you. Very happy to be here.
Great, glad to have you. Let's kick things off with a hot topic at the moment, AI. As we know, organizations are looking at how they can utilize AI and machine learning to improve their operations and business. Can you share your thoughts on the role of AI in shaping data strategies?
For me, it's more of the same, actually. So the problem with AI is around the quality of the data that you give it. If you give it poor quality data, it will make poor quality decisions. And so when you think about how you're going to provision the data into your AI models, it really becomes a question of understanding the biases in that data, understanding the gaps that are in that data, and making conscious decisions about how you use and manage that. If you're using data, for example, from an application that you give to your clients, you have a banking app, you might use that as a way of understanding client sentiment, client activity, all of which is valid, but it's not valid for the entire population of your client base, because there are people who will not be using that app. Maybe the elderly, maybe other groups who don't have access to that technology. So you need to be aware of what's not in the data, as well as trust what is in the data to be of decent quality. So data strategy doesn't really change, but you need to be much, much more aware of the data itself.
That's really interesting. And with AI playing such a key role, and from what you were just saying, it's clear that of the data that you do have, you have to be able to make the most out of that. So what are techniques that organizations could use to extract the maximum value from their data?
First of all, dig a little bit into what value means. What are people trying to get out of their data? Because that's different from one organization to the next. For some organizations, getting value from the data means looking internally, using the data to drive their internal efficiency, to understand whether their internal processes are performing versus not performing. You can also then use the data to derive insight about your clients, the decisions they're making, how they're interacting with your organization, the sorts of products that are selling or not selling. And then finally, you can sell the data itself, of course. You can sell the insight as well, but you can sell the data as data sets, as pieces of insight. So monetization means all of those things. What we typically see is that as organizations come up the maturity curve of that, that is the order in which they do things. So the first step is looking internally, then they rise up to look at their clients, and then when they've got data which is valuable, they can start to sell it. So that's the pattern that we would generally see. In terms then of how organizations are trying to get onto that ramp, again, there's a maturity level on that. So for a small organization, it's reasonably straightforward. You need to aggregate their data into a place where you can access it all at once. But for the really big organizations, that's quite a challenge. It's not feasible if you're a very large institution to centralize all of your data into a single place. Not only is scalability an issue, but actually forming a data model that will allow you to navigate that in sort of easy transitions is a very, very significant task. So what we see there is the move towards things like the mesh models, the fabric models, where you're leaving the data where it is and joining it on the fly in order to get your arms around all of the data in your organization. Most organizations have data which is stovepiped into finance, into risk, into various different departmental groups. And what organizations are trying to do in order to see that efficiency, in order to see how their clients are performing, in order to provide insight, what they're trying to do is to get their arms around all of that. And these days, it doesn't involve building a central store to make that happen.
So based on that, would you say that we're seeing a change in the way that organizations are approaching their consolidation of that data? So instead of putting everything in one place, it's more about being able to access it from a number of different places and bringing it together and modeling it in a way that then works for the business?
Yes, absolutely. And the key behind that is not really the architecture, but the organization itself. So changing the way the organization works, which is the hard part of that particular journey. So we see that in terms of particularly product ownership. That's the emerging pattern, which many organizations are now trialing, which if you are familiar with the way that the sort of agile product ownership was first trialed and rolled out, it's a similar journey for data groups. So people are being asked to plan roadmaps, to understand the use cases for the data they're producing, to understand what the quality requirements are for the data that they're producing, and to produce a product. So like any product, it needs to be consumable. You need to understand what it is. You need to understand where it's come from. You need to understand what its sell-by date is. It's like buying a product in a supermarket. So that notion of product ownership. We see that being adopted a lot in organizations now, but it has quite a big impact on the organization itself. It's not a trivial change. Again, I'll refer you back to the agile product owner changes, because again, what people found there was they tried to promote, at the time it would have been project managers, to become product owners, and some very different skill. Similarly with data product ownership. You might take someone who's managing the feed environment, the reporting environment from a data platform, and expect them to become a product owner. It's a different skill. So there's a change involved in that. Also, as you try and roll out this view of analytics, this view of data being an asset which your organization is able to leverage for these insight purposes we were talking about earlier, there are some requirements there in terms of literacy. So making sure that your organization understands and is asking questions about the data. So it doesn't just use it blindly. It doesn't assume it's correct. It queries and makes sure that it's making the right choices. And the final point, I guess, would be around incentives and funding. So if you're making this sort of change where you're trying to convert your organization to being one which has product ownership, which has a way of aggregating and sharing data, which has a shared sense of data direction, you cannot do that as a skunkworks project. You can't grow it from the bottom up. It has to be centrally funded and centrally mandated so that everyone's on the same journey. Now, that's a difficult ask. If your day job is to be running the finance reporting platform, you're suddenly asked to do a whole bunch of additional things which don't service the line of business which you're working in. That's a difficult thing to achieve because there are competing priorities. So these are the problems that organizations are facing as they go on that journey.
Thank you very much. And speaking of change is a constant in the tech world, which brings us to the next question. What are some of the key challenges businesses face due to the rapid rate of change in data technologies?
I think one of the key changes there is when you combine the rate of change in data technology and the growth of data tooling and the tenure of some of the senior leaders in these organizations, what you find is that as a new C-suite member rolls in, the technology is all refreshed and they're able to say, why are you using this old technology? You should be using this latest thing. And all the IT teams halfway through one conversion project suddenly have to drop everything and start again onto the next one. And we see this repeatedly. So many organizations have got half-completed projects as they try and pick up the next thing and keep up. So that's been a theme since probably 2015. I think now we might be beginning to see that tail off. We might be seeing the rate of change of that technology infrastructure slowing down as we get to a sort of plateau level now. But that's certainly been one of the challenges in the past. Of course, the other story in this space would be the cloud journey. So most of the organizations that we're working with, most of them are hybrid. So they're trying to put their data onto the cloud because that's where they can most quickly and most easily take advantage of that change. That's where it's available without them having to do a lot of internal engineering. So that makes a lot of sense. But we're now seeing with the arrival of things like DORA, some challenges around becoming multi-cloud. And so the regulatory environment they're working in is shifting underneath them and they're having to change the way they've deployed these things. So it's not just technology change that impacts this, it's also some of the regulatory changes and things in that space. And then finally, you end up in the FinOps space, particularly in the cloud, because you get micro-level bills, start to work out who's paying for what and how that gets distributed across the organization, which is taking value from it. For example, if I'm building a data as a product tool, which I'm sharing firm-wide, who actually pays for that? Where does the cost for that go? If someone's running a lot of queries against my data set, I'm picking up a lot of charge. How do I recompense my department for the cost, which is coming in as an operational cost? So there's quite a lot in that space. And you're right, changes are constant and everyone has to just deal with it.
Before we wrap up, I think it's important to cast our gaze forward. Looking towards the future, what emerging trends or technologies do you believe will shape the landscape of data and analytics over the next few years? And how can organizations best prepare for these changes?
I think data operations is the emerging frontier in the world of data. We've spent a lot of time in the last few years looking at data technologies and how those are emerging. As you create those environments where data products are being pooled together, you're creating a brand new data environment, which no one really anticipated. No one really knows how to operate yet. But on the positive side, we're also seeing a bunch of new tools emerging, which are helping to industrialize that and make it robust, which of course is the ambition for any organization. So in terms of the themes that we would see there, data concordance is one. In other words, having disparate data sets that begin to work together is one of the things that we'll expect to see coming out of the operations world. Data observability is real-time data quality as a notion, but that neatly turns around one of the biggest problems and unsolved problems, which is lineage. Keeping and maintaining lineage across a complex environment has proven to be not something we can easily automate. We can all work it out at a point in time, but automating it so it's always up to date has proved extremely difficult. And using that lineage at a point of crisis, so when the regulator's on your door saying this report isn't right, you reach for your incorrect lineage and try and work upstream to work out what's happened. That's a difficult process, and one that I've seen many organizations struggle with. The notion behind observability and some of the tooling behind observability tries to fix that problem as it's coming at you rather than once the regulator's on your doorstep. So that's obviously a good step forward when that becomes properly embedded. We're also expecting to see things like data contracts becoming more industrialized in terms of not being a piece of paper, but being an API contract, something which you can rely upon and which you can code around and construct in technology terms. Knowledge graphs so that you can find the data. The current catalogs and dictionaries are all very well, but actually being able to link data together and traverse that to create logical extracts is something which is better served on the knowledge graph. But that's a difficult journey. And again, we're seeing people embarking on that now, and pleased to see it because I think it'll be a game changer when we finally get there. And of course, marketplaces as a way of actually navigating the data as a user to see what's available, something else you would expect to see in that kind of operations team. So how do you use that environment now you've stood it up?
Thank you for sharing your expertise, Tim. It's evident that when it comes to data, things can be complex, but for those who are prepared, informed and adaptable, the opportunities are immense.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Synechron State of Tech podcast. Don't forget to like and share this episode and subscribe to stay up to date on all of the latest and innovative technologies savvy businesses need to know about. To learn more about Synechron, head to our website at www.synechron.com. Stay tuned.